A very good evening, a slightly belated good evening. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Norman Goodfellows. Apologies for slight delay, one or two minor technical hiccups, but we are up and running, and very happily so, because this evening we're drinking some very, very special wine. Now, that in itself is not unusual, but there is an added resonance to this evening's show, because I'm sitting inside some of you might remember from around about this time last year, the cellar beneath the clubhouse at the River Club in Johannesburg, the city's most exclusive and prestigious golf club, which has got a membership that rather likes its wine. And this cellar is full of not just some of the best of South African wine, but also some fabulous French, Italian, I think there's a bit of Kiwi wine floating around as well. But no matter how good all of that is, it's going to be having its work cut out for it to match the wine I've got here. Because the reason for being at the River Club, MMQS, Mandla Mlangeni and his team put together a very special golf day that I host for them each year, where we play 27 holes, and it's all in commemoration and remembrance of the 27 years that Madiba spent imprisoned. And so we look back on that. We play a hard 27 holes of golf. There's a lot of money raised for some very good causes, and it's just a really good day out in memory of Madiba. Last year, we drank some original Graham Beck from the Mandela inauguration banquet when he became president. What we decided to do this year was dip back 27 years. And so the three wines I've got are all Cabernet Sauvignons. They are all from Stellenbosch, from Warwick, from Kanonkop, and from Kaapzicht. And so this evening I'll be joined by a couple of winemakers who I hold in particularly high esteem to find out just why this wine is able to last so well, what the art of creating wine that can sustain beyond the first 5 or 10 years is, and why these are just such special brands from the heart of Stellenbosch. So that is on the show this evening. I'll be joined by Aubrey Beersla in just a moment, as well as by Dani Statler. Before we do that, though, and jump into some wine that I can tell you, it's a spoiler alert, is drinking very nicely indeed, let's have a quick look at some of the latest wine news. So this is coming up at Ellerman House, the chance to drink some fabulous wine with Catherine Marshall, and to do so alongside of some rather nice food. You can see all of the details on screen. These evenings at Ellerman House are superb. The food is terrific. Peter Templehoff's guiding hand still lingers. The cellar is brilliant. The cellar will be drawing on its Catherine Marshall collection, and she does make some lovely wine. We've had her on the show a couple of times, and this will be the opportunity not just to drink her wine and to have some food paired with it, but also to experience the winemaker evening and get to ask the winemaker, in this case Catherine, about the wine she's making, how she produces it, what makes it quite so special. So if you're up for a rather special night out, limited seats, but that's one at Ellerman House that I'd highly recommend attending. And this is Sunday, and we head to Stellenbosch. Mostly, the Savage wines will be from a little further afield, some of them at least. The Lima Mountain Vineyards, Rance Family Wines, and Savage Wines. And this is Sunday morning's auction, and it's going to be one which is, I think, to look out for simply because of the vintages. And over the last few years, I've bought a number of older Thelema wines in particular, which have just drunk brilliantly, stuff from 2000, 2001, still in showroom condition. Had some 2013 Rats last weekend, beautiful. And Duncan Savage, going back to those early days when he was only ever going to make 2 wines. He's on about 12 now. And again, wine that ages really well, including the whites. And there'll be a selection there going back, I presume, 20 years and more from the Strauss platform. So get registered, go and have a look online to see exactly what they've got for sale, and then your chance to do some online shopping at the auction on Sunday. This is coming up this Wednesday, your chance to get out to the chef's table. Dirk Coetzee, the winemaker at L'Avenir, is going to be at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg. Chef's table, a very small affair, just 8 spaces available. Dirk taking you through the wine, Chef Ransley Peterson guiding you through his menu. These are just terrific nights. They're lots of fun. It's lovely to have that time with the winemaker and Thren Ransley as well. Great food, great wine, lovely environment. And there's one for Wednesday night if you're free. And then lastly, the Ex Animo Pinotage workshop. This is going to be down in Cape Town. This is on Thursday. You can either be there in person or you can live stream it. And it's going to be the chance. In fact, I think Aubrey might be part of this. I'll have to double check with them in a moment. But it's your chance to have a look at Pinotage in a slightly different light. There's very much a changing face to Pinotage. We haven't lost the old style, the more robust style. But this more frequently seen style of a lighter, more delicate interpretation is getting a lot of traction, a lot of attention. So where does that put Pinotage at the moment for South Africa? Well, this will be a great opportunity to find out from a couple of experts where they feel Pinotage is and where it's going. That's with the Ex Animo team. Head over to their website at Ex Animo and get all the details to sign up. Okay, well, this is the River Club. We've had a lovely day, had some enjoyable golf. It was largely diabolical, but it was great fun. And just before I head upstairs to run the evening and celebrate some great wine with some great people, the chance to celebrate some great wine down here. Now, all of this wine, we have a case of each. We're going to be drinking it this evening with all of the guests who've all made some very sizable donations to charity. So this is a chance to thank them with some world-class wine and wine that goes back 27 years. So 27 years, is it still drinkable? Is it still good? Is it still amazing? Well, let's find out why it might be one of those while I taste them in the company of two winemakers I love spending time with on the show. I spent some time with Dani Slater last week down on his farm, and that was delightful as well. So Aubrey, a very warm welcome, and Dani as well. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Lovely to have you here, and lovely to be able to celebrate wine that is quite so old. And if I look at the Kanonkop, Aubrey, I was talking to the guys earlier about the wine we had, and the moment I mentioned Kanonkop, there is not just an immediate recognition of the wine and the brands within it. Paul Sauer in particular always gets people's eyebrows up, but there's also generally amongst certainly the people here today kind of a quiet nod. Ah, yes, older Kanonkop, that'll be pretty good stuff. You've created in Kanonkop not just a wonderful South African brand, but a brand that people appreciate for its heritage and for its ability to age. It's become a real signature of Kanonkop.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you for the opportunity to share some insight into our wines. Definitely, I think we're very lucky with the setup we have here at Kanonkop, because there's a couple of things that makes for wines to be able to age, and one of them are definitely your vineyards. Working with Cabernet from Stellenbosch, it's low yielding vineyards, so a lot of tannins normally. That's the building blocks for wine with aging ability. And secondly, we work very oxidatively. So that means we get a lot of oxygen during the process. So we work with open top fermenters. For a lot of people that's been here have seen them. We do punch down, so we do a lot of extraction, but very oxidatively. And that means that the oxygen that we getting during fermentation stabilizes this wine so that it can age for a long period of time without, becoming dumb or becoming tired. And then also after that, proper barrel aging for 24 months. I think those are the three key points for me when it comes to wines: ageability, and after that, of course, also the vintage conditions. So when you taste through the 90s, 96 are drinking fine, but 95 will be drinking better because it was a better vintage. So also 97 is drinking extremely well now. Also 91 is still fantastic condition, but it's all due to vintage conditions.
Which is all well and good, having a vintage that works, having a process that's appreciable, but you've also got to have the intent when you're setting out to make the wine. You've got to say, right, this is wine that I want to be able to last. How particular is that in terms of the approach you take? How much does that define how you are making your wine, knowing that, in 10, 15, 20, in this case, 27 years time, there might be people who still have this wine and are wanting to drink it. And I want to make sure that even if I've moved on somewhere else, this wine is still reflecting the best of Kanonkop and is still eminently drinkable.
Yeah, I think it's a whole hive of bees you're opening up when you ask that question, because today A lot of wines are driven by style or what the market wants, or by being able to be drunk very, very young, just because it makes financial sense. So being able to make wines that are of specific style because we believe in the quality of the wine, and foremost in the quality of wine, and secondly, we're not trying to make wines that's approachable necessarily immediately. That's secondary to making the best possible quality wine. And I think that approach helps to have wine that can age well. If you want to make a wine that's accessible immediately, you are sacrificing some part of it, and that's not the game we are playing.
The approach that you have is one that is not, well, Arbery's come along, he's decided to do this. We go back, the history of Kanonkop, which is now 50 years, you've had some rather well-known winemakers who have done exactly this. How much of a cue have you taken, not just in terms of wanting to make wine that can age, but in their approach, and learned from your predecessors the art of mastering the production of wine that can go the distance?
Yeah, I think I still taking cues from them. So I just spoke with Bayers this afternoon, and every time we talk about wine, it's a lesson to be learned. And I think when you start at a winery like Kanonkop and you look at the history and everything that's been built, you can't come in here with the idea of changing things around. That is, you can do more damage. So from the beginning, my approach was refinement rather than changing things. I don't want to leave my thumbprint on any bottle of wine. It must be the property first, and your interpretation comes second to that. And it's all about refinement rather than changing things.
What about the development of wine? We're going to speak about this wine in a little more detail slightly later in the show. But just broadly speaking, there's an evolution of wine. A wine like this, a year or two in, is going to be tannic and quite abrasive and not really very friendly. And then it starts to find its feet and it smooths out. And they're kind of different stages as that wine then, when it gets to this kind of age, pushing 30 years old, it's developed another character entirely. There are a lot more of those tertiary notes coming through. And for people who maybe haven't drunk older wine, who don't kind of understand that sort of process, what are you as a wine drinker looking for that wine to become that is telling you, wow, this has done something really special almost 30 years in?
Yeah, for me, I love it when wine becomes effortless. When you drink a young wine, it's a lot of times you're forced to analyze it and see, what is the structure about, what the aromatics are you getting. But when you get to a wine of 20, 30 years old, everything becomes seamless, and it's appreciation on a different level. So it's effortless. You just drink the glass of wine. When you open your eyes, you finish the bottle. You don't know how that happened. You just know you're in the right space at the right place right now. And so it's very difficult to explain, but if it's a well-aged, proper bottle of wine, you don't pick up specific fruit aromatics like berries or stuff like that. The secondary flavors become much more interesting, and that when you look at the Cabernet specifically, you'll have more like a tea leaf character. You have a bit more of the forest floor aromatics. So this is much more complex characteristics, and also perfume. Perfume for me is always the best descriptor because it's so complex. You struggle to pick out specific characteristics, and that's what we want with aged wines. All these more complex characters that give you experience rather than a specific characteristic.
We're going to come into the particular wine that Arbery has very kindly sent up to us in just a moment. Let's head over to the King of the Bry. And I wish I actually had a photo of this. I was too taken aback to get one while I was there. But I had dinner at Dani Stakler's house. Dani Stakler, of course, the son of Dani Stakler, who is the son of Dani Stakler, who was the son of Dani Stakler. And Dani is somebody celebrated for his love of the Bry. And the braais, and I use the plural very deliberately, that Dani has include not one but two inside his living room. Now, my wife would strangle me if I tried something similar, but Dani's a rather charming sort, and Mrs. Stateless seems to think this is fantastic, so I need her to spend more time with my wife. Dani, welcome to the show. Thanks again for the wonderful hospitality last week. It was great not just being able to have dinner and spend some time with you, but also to get into the cellar and to see this library of wine that you've collected that is more than just here's a selection of old wine. It's a beautiful diary of your family and your family's endeavors at Kaapzicht, and the ability to just flip back in time by taking a wander through the cellar.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Nice to see you again. And yeah, it's I suppose it's one of those things when you're making wines and you can't sell them, and you got to store them. Eh? So it's probably where that came from.
Is made in part by yourself, but a huge chunk of it is made by your dad. Tell me a bit about that passing of the baton and coming into the role that he took on himself. You're now the fourth generation, and kind of understanding what he did, following in his footsteps, but also kind of blending who he did and how he made wine with your own style, your own interpretation, and your own approach to winemaking.
I think a lot like Aubrey said, obviously you learn a lot from your father. Growing up, you drink a lot that style of wine, so your palate, so I find my palate's very much aligned with my father's, but to try and not change it but improve it somehow. I'm not always entirely sure that I am improving, but we try and taste as much other wines as possible. We hear what's currently the fashion, and then we don't follow it, but we take it into heart. So at the moment people are wanting lower alcohol wines, slightly more refined, more freshness, so we'll maybe tone down oak, pick a little bit earlier, try and polish the wine slightly more, that the wine is hopefully a little bit better.
Does that make it then something of an arm wrestle between Dani the artist and Dani the businessman, where this is the beautiful bottle of wine I'd like to create that in 25 years is still going to be magnificent, and then there's Dani the businessman who knows, well, I've got to be able to sell this so people drink it and I can shift it on the Norman Goodfellows floors. Is that a constant juggle?
Yes, definitely. It's probably my biggest fight is constantly that. As winemakers, you're a little bit of you can call it artistic. You want to try different things, whereas an accountant will tell you, no, you must stick to one thing. Don't do too many things. Try and sell as few products, but a lot more of it. So, there's the business side versus the true winemaker in you wanting to experiment, try new things. Obviously, I think the ultimate, expression of quality wines is something that can age for 26 plus years. Kanonkop has obviously been doing that very well, and everyone knows that. I'm not entirely sure that we're in that same class, but hopefully. I have no idea what that wine tastes like. I was 16 years old when that vintage happened, so that was made by my father. But holding thumbs that, we always try to make quality wines, and cab being something that can age well, it's still something that those poor oaks at the golf course I'm going to spit out tonight.
I think they're all very excited about drinking all of it, and we're going to taste it in slightly more detail in just a moment. Aubrey spoke about how Kanonkop lends itself to creating wine that can last as long as this and can still grow into itself for decades. Is it a fairly similar story at Kaapzicht, just the combination of some pretty good terroir together with the techniques you approach in the cellar?
Yep, definitely. That's might have not said it as eloquently, but that is in the end the goal, to make something that can last for generations. The Statler wines are top stuff. Definitely that's what's in mind. So, if it's not drinkable in the first 3-4 years, it's because it's made with a point so that you can drink it years to come. I think the kind of family range and more accessible Kaapzicht wines, they need to be drinkable now, though. So that's, a little bit the compromise that we are told 90% of wine is consumed, I think, within the first 48 hours of it being bought. So, our jobs now as winemakers are putting out produce that can be consumed quite quickly, and people don't all have cellars. But in the end, it's the greatest compliment if someone can open a bottle that's 26 years old, and it is still seamless, like Aubrey said.
We're going to jump into both of those wines in a second. Before I jump back to Aubrey, though, just Cabernet Sauvignon as a grape. We've got 3 wines here. They all go back to 1996. They're all Cabernet Sauvignon. What is it about Cab Sav that lends itself, in the right hands, of course, in the right terroir, to this kind of longevity?
I think probably best way to describe it is if you look at the composition of a berry. You've got a small Cab is the smallest berry. You've got inside sugar water, really. The tannin, the color, the flavor sits in the skin. So the smaller your berry is, the more surface area of skin you have for the volume of juice. So Cab is just this great cultivar. Being so small, it's got more concentration, more tannin, more color, and that's what makes it such a good cultivar to age. And also that's why Cab's often the base for blends, because of this attribute that it brings to any wine. So yeah, definitely the right choice there. 3 Cabs, that'd be the best bet for still a solid wine to drink tonight.
All right, well, let's find out exactly how they're going and head back to Aubrey at Kanonkop. 1996, is this the wine that Beyers would have made?
Yeah, that's right. Beyers was here at 96 from 81 till end of 2002. So I only joined 2002, and we worked together for a year. But yeah, it's a wine he would have made. It wasn't the best of vintages. 95 was considered probably for us the best vintage, and a good vintage normally means slow ripening period. Good conditions through the growing season. So in 96, so that would be in the growing season or the flowering period of end of 95. We had about 70 millimeters of rain, which isn't great for during flowering, because pollination rather wants warmer temperature with not too much wind and not too much rain. So that wasn't ideal. And then we also had a lot of rain in February. Sometimes it can be beneficial because Cabernet only ripens in March. So the rains in February normally helps for those grapes to ripen properly. But if the temperature keeps up, if in March cools down too much, the Cabernet struggle to ripen properly. So struggling conditions for 96. It wasn't ideal, but we are happy how the wines have turned out.
How often does wine surprise you? And I go back to a conversation I had over lunch last week with Rutger van Wyk from Stark Conde, where we were talking about the 15s and the 17s, and it didn't take too long before everybody started talking about 15 and went absolutely berserk. 17 sat quietly a couple of years later, and then bit by bit started to rise to prominence. And for a number of winemakers I've spoken with, they now feel their 17s are in the long term a better wine than 15. Do vintages still have this capacity to surprise you as winemakers?
Yeah, it really does. I think the amount of variances there is in a vintage that can create something really unique and special. I don't think we really fully understand it. So there's still every vintage there's something new and that I experience. And my reference is only at Kanonkop only about 22 years long, and every year there's still something new to be learned and to experience. And yeah, it is the amount of variances is just that much. 97 vintage, for instance, was very wet and cold, and for the first 10 years of that vintage, we rated the vintage as a 3-star vintage. And then around 2005, we started to taste the wine, and it just started to open up. And 97 today for me is actually a 4.5 to 5-star vintage. And so like I said, for the first 10 years, we thought it was just very average and light. So wine it's alive and it changes the whole time. And I think to interpret the vintage and be too critical about it is not great. And 2015 and 2017 such different vintages, to trying to say which one is better is actually also unfair to both those vintages.
It does, of course, make it lots of fun in terms of the wine debates that we all enjoy having, and we do so over wine, as I'm doing now with your 1996 Cabernet Sauvignon. And probably the two things, Aubrey, that strike me most immediately. The first is the freshness of the wine. It's still very much alive. It's still very much got a heartbeat to it. And then the other thing is that it doesn't have something you do sometimes get with that older red wine, where it takes on that slight metallic edge. It's got that slightly ferrous rim. That is not here. It might not be quite as intense as it might have been, but there's a softness all the way through the wine that's not framed by any of that slightly metallic ridge that I have had in some reds that haven't lasted the distance. So it's clearly a wine that has got through these 27 years in extremely good health.
Yeah, I think, when you look at most of the Kanonkop wines, we had a bottle of the 2001 Cadet on Friday evening, which is our second wine. And that wine was drinking extremely well. So that, drinking a second wine that's 20 years old already says a lot about, what we do on the property. And firstly, like I said, we're blessed with great terroir. A focus on making quality wine, low yielding vineyards. Not that it's, the alpha and the omega, but it plays a role. And then oxidative winemaking. When you look at Kanonkop, older Kanonkop wine, the color is normally quite youthful and bright. And again, the reason for that is oxidation. Oxygen during fermentation plays such a crucial role. And today we still use 100, for this will be about 60% new French oak barrels. The Pulsar is 100% new oak. So we believe in proper oak, and that also plays a role in helping the aging ability of the wine. I agree with you. These wines are still very fresh. Again, you don't find the specific primary fruit on it, but that's not necessary. That's not what you're looking for in an older wine. The palates are very smooth, silky, velvety, and it just slides down your throat, which makes it very tempting to drink.
Slides down at an alarming speed, but very happily so. The year of 2015 was probably best celebrated by a 100-pointer that you were responsible for, that great Kanonkop Paul Sour. When we talk to wine collectors and wine authorities, they'll often talk about the great vintages of Burgundy or the great vintages of Bordeaux. And there's a very keen understanding in France and I think other parts of Europe of years that people in the rest of the wine world know. Do you think we are starting to get towards something similar whereby wine collectors in Europe and the rest of the world are getting to know a bit more about a Stellenbosch vintage and are starting to really look out for particular years based on how well it's done?
Yeah, I can see that, and I have a lot of people phoning me to figure out early on what the vintage was like, trying to understand what the quality will be in the near future. So we do get that. I think is definitely a better understanding, and vintages like 2015 do play a role. Combined with high scoring wines, I think that is the main thing. If we can get more high scoring wines, on specific vintages, I think it will be even more helpful. We, as South Africans, as South African industry, we don't see enough of these of South African wines being rated highly enough internationally, and that's probably the biggest problem that we have, is getting that recognition for the quality that we produce. But I think all the wineries South Africa is hard at work at that. But yeah, I think for us, it's very much a conversation about what vintages, what was the vintage like. If it's a bigger yielding vintage like 2014 or 2018, you'll find that these wines are slightly lighter in structure. They are more accessible, younger. compared to vintages like 15. Now we forget quickly that 15 and 17 was in the middle of the drought. 15 was the beginning of the drought, 17 was in the middle of the drought. So this was trying tough conditions and being able to make wines of such high quality in such difficult conditions also says a lot of our industry and the vineyards that we get to work with.
So the understanding of vintage is becoming more pronounced, which is great news. Dani, what about the understanding of going beyond just a broad Stellenbosch? There are some people for whom South African wine is just a broad entity. That's as much as they know. It's a South African wine, and they'll judge it as being South African. But more and more people are understanding that there's a difference between a Stellenbosch and a Constantia and a Hemelanade and a Swartland and the different wine regions we have. What about the understanding of breaking down Stellenbosch even further? Do you think more people, and I presume South Africans primarily, are not just understanding that there's more to Stellenbosch than just one big homogenous wine area, but also that all these different areas can introduce, in a subtle and nuanced way, very different interpretations of the same grape?
Yep, definitely. I think we as wine producers are actually also haven't quite understood it all yet and are working together. And that's where it's so nice when we have the Stellenbosch Cab collective, or a group of us, Aubrey's part of, Kanonkop, Waterford, Lariche. There's lots, part of this thing where we exchange information. We actually did a little experiment 2 years ago where we swapped grapes. So we were 5 producers, I think, where we each gave each other 500 kilo of our cab, and then made the wines all the same way, so that the only difference was really terroir, the way that you take the winemaking out of it, to try and understand terroirs better. It's difficult to compare a Kanonkop to a Kaapzicht if there's different winemaking stylistics. But if Aubrey makes a cab from his cab and from my cab, then you take the winemaking out. And so we did that to try and understand what the different terroirs bring. Obviously, you've got soil, slopes, the microclimate, so many differences. So it's very interesting to see what these different areas within Stellenbosch or within any area, how different the wines can be.
And that extends to wine from a little way back, because I've now had a couple of mouthfuls of the Kaapzicht, and yes, it is a different wine, but it shares the same 2 key characteristics that I mentioned to Aubrey, Dani, and that would be it has got that lovely softness to it, and it still has a freshness to it. So for the second wine in a row, something that is certainly not suggesting, oh, sell by date here, you better get rid of me quickly. It's still alive and kicking, and in a really good space.
Yeah, I'm very happy about that. I was actually quite nervous that you might say it tastes like vinegar or something. But yeah, I think we're lucky that Cab is such a cultivar that can age well. And I think the idea has always been to try and make the best possible wine. And so, probably, hopefully has aged well. I'm also going to open a bottle later tonight so that I can check it with you.
One of the things, once you have opened that you'll be able to pick up on, other than just how well it's lasted, is the approach to that Cabernet Sauvignon. And I suspect you don't need to drink this to be able to give me the answer to the question, which is, how much has the style of making Cabernet Sauvignon shifted? The immediate example being between you and your dad, but more broadly speaking, over the last 3 decades, as different understandings and experience come into play.
Yeah, I think if you look at the 70s and possibly the 80s as well, a lot of Cinsault was blended into the cabs, partly from a production point of view, that you'd struggle to pump Cabernet skins. Like I said to you earlier, there was very little juice, a lot of skin and pip. The pumps actually couldn't physically pump that stuff, so you had to put some Cinsault in to give a bit of juice and lubrication. Obviously, machinery got better, and stylistics have changed a lot, often because of climate, sometimes because of what people want and what scored well. So 90s, like this wine, the introduction of new barrels. So a lot of the top wines were small barrels, 100% new oak. In the earlier vintages, alcohols were generally lower. Nowadays, cab is often pushed to 14 and a half alcohol because winemakers are scared of the green characteristics in the wine. But I think there's a turning back again, because the 2000s were really pushing the ripeness levels, lots of oak. Now there's again a trend to try and bring more freshness back into the wine, more tension, maybe a little bit less oak, and show the fruit more. But that, differs from winemaker to winemaker, also region to region, depending on what works best in your area. Yeah.
When we were jumping onto the show just before we went live, you and I were engaged in some very enthusiastic conversation. It's the Cabernet Collective. It's winemakers generally, I find, in South Africa, that exchanging of ideas, that understanding of what is working, what's not going quite so well. How much does that shape your understanding of what you're doing with something like a Cabernet Sauvignon through people like the Collective, and your ability to then adjust and hopefully make something that's even better than it was before?
Yeah, I must say, I think that is that's probably the nicest part of our industry. A guy like Aubrey who's worked 21 years, Aubrey at Kanonkop, he's got a massive amount of wealth of knowledge and so on. And the guys they're keen to share and help. For me, the competition isn't Kanonkop. The competition is France, Australia, the other producers. If we can all lift the quality of our wines and the image of South African wines internationally, then we all do better. And I think the younger generation definitely sees that. And there's, I think, a lot more sharing going on now than maybe there was in the 80s and 90s and so on. But yeah, we learn a lot from each other. So it's a nice industry to work in.
Which is a great sentiment to be able to share on the eve of Mandela Day, as we come to you from the River Club and the MMQS Giving Back for Mandela Day with esteemed wine collector Mandela Mlangeni, and some wine that goes back to 1996. Now, just before we do wrap up, Aubrey, I want to ask you about one of your near neighbours, because I plucked from my cellar to bring along as well some of the Warwick. And I think there was a great winemaker who made your particular wine in the form of Bayers. Would I be right in saying, Aubrey, that the Warwick in 96 would have been one of Norma's wines?
Yeah, that would have been still one of Norma's wine, which also a great winemaker and a lady I really keep in high esteem. She's a fantastic person, and I really always spending some time with her and just listening about her wealth of knowledge about wine, and I have a big appreciation for also her contribution to our industry,
which was immense, as indeed is yours, Aubrey. 2 decades and counting now with Kanonkop. To what extent, as you look forward to the years to come, as you continue to make more vintages, what stage is it? Well, we're in a happy space. We know what we're doing, and we continue as we are. And how much are you still pushing yourself, still looking to learn, to discover, to see what else you can probably do to get even more out of an already great estate and great vintages?
Yeah, I must say my happy space is my uncomfortable space. I don't feel comfortable, when things are going too easy. So challenging yourself the whole time, and that means it has different meaning for me, or for every person it will be different. But growing my knowledge and the way I interpret each vintage, I think is for me a daily challenge. But trying to compete on an international level and asking the right questions. Why aren't we getting the recognition that we should get? Because, the amount of tastings we've done over the years, blind tasting, comparative tastings with the best in the world, we should be there. So, challenging the international platform to recognize South African wines for what they are. I think today is part of the drive that we are pushing for. And and then there's, on ground level, there's a lot of work going in still. We've passed the point of looking at all just analysis and stuff. We're getting to a point where we are looking more holistically, and at Kanonkop we are doing things like, what role does the ecology play in long-term benefits for wine production? With the farming practices, what's the best practices? We have to look at stuff like carbon concentration in the soil. We have to look at just much more holistically the people, the sustainability. All of those things have to partner up to make the best possible wine. So that's where we are now at Kanonkop. It's not only analyzing. It's much more holistic.
A little later on this year, we just need to set it up, hoping to have Aubrey and the Cricketers and a few others online to celebrate half a century of Kanonkop excellence. But as you can see, it's more than just tossing some grapes into a barrel and hoping for the best. It's a rather complex business, but one which is being mastered at Kanonkop, as it is at Kaapzicht, where Dani is generation number 4. Another 20, 25 years, Dani Statler, the 5th, could well be in the cellar making wine there. As and when you do hand over, if that is how things play out, you'll be able to do so with this history book that is your cellar. That element of wine being a time capsule, of capturing history and being able to delve back into 27 years as we are today. How much does that mean to you as a winemaker?
Yeah, I think it's very cool to be able to do that. I think that's one of the nice things working on a family farm. You have the experience of your father to fall back on, and hopefully I can, if my son wants to take over, I can give that to him too. I think being able to store some wines and look back at them and see how they age, that's really the special part of what we do. So definitely something we like doing.
And just in closing, winemakers are not very good at patting themselves on the back or going overboard with the hyperbole of great wine. But when, as you will later on this evening, you open a bottle of 1996, and it is, I'm sure it will be, given this one, fresh and alive and just an utter delight, does that warm feeling still fill you? Do you still get that burst of family pride that this is something your family, your dad, your heritage and tradition have come together to create?
Yep, it does make me feel proud. I love it. Some mates drink my wines and they send me a photo over the weekend. They're braaiing, they're drinking this wine, or you see the wine, somewhere in an international shop, and there's definitely lots of pride. We put a lot of love and effort into what we do, and it's nice to be able to share it with people, and it's particularly nice if it's been 26 years ago and it's still nice. Then you get a nice kick out of it.
That is indeed. Aubrey Bisler and Dani Statler from Kanonkop and from Kaapzicht, respectively, with 2 of the 3 wines we are drinking this evening. They're all 27 years old, and that is because we are celebrating tomorrow Mandela Day, and today we've been playing 27 holes of golf and are now going into a wonderful wine dinner with wine from 27 years ago, paying tribute to the 27 years that Nelson Mandela spent in prison and the time thereafter, where inspired us in so many different ways, as have our winemakers this evening, showcasing the ability of South African wine to not just be made well, but to be made that well that almost 3 decades later, we're still drinking something that is absolutely superb. And I love that element of South African wine. I need to go and join the rest of the guests this evening, where our host, Mandla Mlangeni, in the spirit of the other number of Madiba, which is 67, is having 67 glasses of wine this evening to pay tribute to our celebration. I'm going to go and give him a hand. Aubrey, Dani, guys, thank you both so much for the insight. Thank you for sharing some really, really special wine. And I think you don't really need me to tell you this, but the pride you can have in producing this wine that doesn't just raise a flag for Kanonkop and Kaapzicht, but tells a beautiful South African history story is really important. So thank you both. Enjoy the wine this evening that I'm sure you'll be drinking, and be assured there are going to be some very happy wine drinkers here at the River Club this evening.
Super. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Dan.
There we go. Dani Stakler 4.0, as well as Aubrey Biesler out at Kanonkop, together with some wine from Warwick that I managed to sneak out of my cellar as well. Having a look back at 1996, and it's something I love about that older wine, the fact that you are jumping back in time. You're going back to times, I was still at high school, believe it or not. Dani was just 16, Aubrey wasn't too much further along. Now we're able to go back, drink this wine that was bottled nearly 3 decades ago, and is still in such robust shape. It's just a really, really nice way to flick back in time and enjoy yourself immensely. And that's what I'm planning to do this evening as I say goodbye and head up to host this evening's dinner. It's been a very special day with the MMQS team at the River Club and a whole pile of very generous friends of not just golf, but also of South Africa, who've donated a fair amount of money and supported hugely a number of communities benefiting from today. Whatever you're doing tomorrow for your Mandela Day, I hope you enjoy it and I hope you get the best out of it. And I look forward to seeing you back on the show on Thursday when I'll be joined by Derek Kilpin, amongst others. We're drinking some wine from this year's Tour de France route, and we'll also be trying some vintage Simonsuch as their vintage day comes up. Some more old wine. I think I can manage that. Thanks very much for joining us. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Norman Goodfellows. And as we leave, a quick reminder of one of the wines that is sitting in the Dan Really Likes Wine store. It's some slightly older Cabernet Franc from Harberdeelskloof. I'm loving South African Harberdeelskloof, South African Cabernet Franc at the moment. And the Harberdeelskloof with Peter Fellison at the till. That's Peter Allen, the junior version. You know you are in for a treat. Thanks for watching us. Big thank you to Mandla and his team for having us here today. We'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye. In July and August on the Dan Really Likes Wine store with Norman Goodfellows, something very special indeed from the great Peter Allen Finlayson. What have we got?
Dan, we have got 30 cases of the 2018 Cabernet Franc from the Harberdeelskloof Landscape Series.
Oof, I love this wine. I've just had some of the 2021, which is delightful. The 18, another 3 years in bottle, another 3 years aging perfectly. Cabernet Franc, for me, one of the finest grapes we're doing as a single varietal in South Africa at the moment. All yours, only on the Dan Really Likes Wine store with Norman Goodfellows. Jump online, get shopping. There's some really great wine headed your way.